The ACLU is doing some really vital work to fight against the abuse of authority that's continuing under the Trump administration. It was really put in overdrive during the George Bush, Dick Cheney years, and then Obama unfortunately continued many of those practices. And now under Trump, perhaps there's a little bit of a brighter spotlight on it. But listen to this. This is from the ACLU. On October 5th, the ACLU Foundation filed a habeas corpus petition on behalf of an unidentified U.S. citizen unlawfully detained by the U.S. military in Iraq since approximately September 14th for allegedly fighting with the Islamic State group in Syria. The military has refused to make the citizen's identity public or grant him access to counsel or a court. Following a court order requesting information, the government admitted that the American has asked for an attorney. So, listen, this was one of the things that it's not on the table. It's not in the realm of what's acceptable or what's possible. The whole point of having a constitution is your citizens have rights. Even if it's the most disgusting among the citizens who could be a vicious criminal, they still have rights. They still have due process and habeas corpus. So to take a U.S. citizen and detain them with no due process, no access to a lawyer, and no prospects for the future, well, that is the government clearly acting in an unconstitutional and illegal way, and that's not allowed. And listen, you got a really perfect example of this with Guantanamo Bay. Now, the Republican vision, the far-right vision of what Guantanamo Bay is, it goes something like this. They say you shouldn't strawman your opponents, giving them like a weaker position that you can easily slap down. You should steelman your opponents. Well, here's the Republican vision of what went on at Guantanamo Bay. On 9/11, we were attacked by Al-Qaeda. The U.S. government sent out our, highly trained professional special forces, and they were rounded up, top Al-Qaeda officials, and then they shipped them off to Guantanamo Bay to make sure to protect the world from these vicious Al-Qaeda operatives who were planning future attacks and who were guilty of the crime of setting up 9/11 and perhaps doing other attacks somewhere in the Middle East, whether it be Afghanistan, Pakistan, wherever, okay? That's the Republican version of what Guantanamo Bay was. Now, if you believe that version of it and that vision of it, well, then you see why somebody on the right might look at liberals and say, man, why are you against America? These people, they're trying to protect us from the next 9/11, and y'all standing in the way and talking about looking out for terrorist well-being. Now, that's their vision of it. Here's the problem. That is an ignorant vision of what actually happened. It's not based on the facts. We know, because of detailed reporting on this issue that happened in the U.S., but also from other countries as well, that the overwhelming majority of people who were shipped to Guantanamo Bay, what happened was the Bush administration made a deal with warlords in Afghanistan and Pakistan and said, listen, we were attacked on 9/11. We think you guys might know who was responsible and who's a jihadist and not. So if you know people from Al-Qaeda, ship them to us, and then we give you a reward. So what happened? It turns out warlords in Afghanistan and Pakistan are not that trustworthy. In fact, many of the warlords, for example, had child sex slaves. That's literal. And our soldiers were told when they uncovered that some of our allies had child sex slaves, shut up or we're going to dishonorably discharge you. So what did these warlords do? They rounded up people who were their political enemies, no evidence of any connections whatsoever to Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist group, and they shipped them over to Guantanamo Bay, and they collected their rewards. And so the majority of people at Guantanamo Bay, people looked at Obama, the Republicans looked at Obama when he kept releasing people from Guantanamo Bay and having other countries, okay, we'll accept them. People were looking at Obama Like, whoa, you're releasing terrorists. That's how the right framed it. You're releasing terrorists. He's a terrorist sympathizer. No, he's releasing the people who there is zero evidence to implicate are terrorists. These are the people who were picked up by the warlords, who had their lives uprooted, who had their lives destroyed by vicious bad actors. So this is what really happened. And then, of course, on top of these people being innocent, there was torture that went on. You know, we unfortunately got into all the grotesque details of the Senate torture report, where, you know, there was anal rape, anal feeding, which isn't a thing. Doctors are like, nobody does that. You don't shove a tube up somebody's ass and pump food up there. That's what they did. They did sleep deprivation. They would pour cold water on somebody, leave the cell, and sometimes they came back in the morning and the person died. Innocent people died from torture. We know the pictures that came out of Abu Ghraib. That stuff was widespread. So you're holding innocent people with no due process, and you're torturing them, and some of them died as a result of you torturing them. These are all deep, deep war crimes. That's what that is. But this is why we need due process. Do people not see that? Because when you just trust the government, and it's funny, the people who, part of their ideology is, we don't trust the government. We want small government because big government's bad because we don't trust the government. The same people who say they don't trust the government are the same people who turn around and in the most extreme circumstances like Guantanamo Bay, they go, I totally trust the government. Why would you trust? No, they get it wrong all the time. They did get it wrong. This is why you need due process, because that's the only way to try to check and verify that you're getting the right people. When you don't have due process, shit like that happens all the time. When you don't have due process, you get people who are innocent, you torture people. With drone strikes, we killed U.S. citizens with drone strikes. There was Anwar al-Awlaki who was killed, who, by the way, was an extremist, but there was no trial or anything. They just fucking assassinated him with a drone, and they also got his son, who there was no evidence was an extremist. In Trump's first military raid as president, he killed an 8-year-old American girl. That's a real scandal right there. Trump holding a U.S. citizen indefinitely. Like this story here, and the ACLU is now suing over it. This is a scandal. Because, listen, if you abandon your values when the going gets tough, those aren't your values. You don't really believe in the thing you claim to believe in. You know, it's like the issue of free speech, which we talk about all the time. You don't need free speech when somebody says mother's apple pie is delicious and aren't rainbows pretty. Because everybody agrees with that. You need free speech protections, particularly for when somebody says something odious and disgusting. Whether it's somebody on the far right or whether it's somebody, and that's the point, is if you try to suppress the free speech of people on the far right, guess what? You don't think it's going to immediately be flipped and used on Marxists? And you don't even need to believe there's an equivalence there to acknowledge, hey, if you try to use it on fascists, immediately they're going to go for Marxists. So this is when you need due process and habeas corpus the most, is when you have an American citizen who you're convinced, oh, no, they're some sort of terrorist, right? And maybe they are. Maybe they are. Maybe it's not like the Guantanamo Bay situation. Maybe they are. But that's even more that's an even bigger reason to say, well, then we should have no problem proving it in court. We should have no problem bringing up charges, going through the proper procedure. But no, what they do is the opposite of that. And then also, by the way, if indeed this person is a terrorist, well, now you're actually damaging the case. Because now what do? You didn't give them the due process up front. So now any judge with any understanding of the law will go, you didn't abide by due process up front. So now you have to let them go, like on procedural reasons, because you didn't follow the proper procedure. So ironically, the Lindsey Graham types who say, oh, hold him in a military tribunal and don't give them their rights, don't read the Miranda rights. They're the people who are sabotaging these cases. Because then you hold them, and then what are you going to do? You didn't prove anything in a court of law, so you either hold them indefinitely or you're going to have to let them go at some point. So, what a terrible situation that we're in. And this is what happened with Guantanamo. Now they're doing it again, in this case in Iraq and Syria. I don't know, found this guy, U.S. citizen, not sure, maybe was fighting with terrorists, we're going to hold him now. If he was fighting with terrorists, or if he wasn't, you have the process set up, you go through due process, you adjudicate it, and then you move on. Instead, this is the worst of all worlds. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about civil liberties. They don't care about freedom and democracy and the Constitution and rule of law. They're doing the exact opposite, and they're screwing everything up in the process.